Okay, wait, hear me out. A few months ago, I woke up in a cold sweat with a burning question. Bro, is Pokemon even turn-based?
Taking an edible before 12 is crazy, man.
Of course, all my friends thought I had finally lost it after watching the Blue Jays choke the World Series game, but I knew I wasn't crazy. Pokemon has always been described as a turn-based game, but it doesn't really play like any classic turn-based game I've personally played. So I set out to find answers. I couldn't sleep until I got to the bottom of this question. I gotta figure this out, right now, here, immediately.
Many months later.
Okay, so I may have delayed this one a little bit. You know, stuff happens, very important stuff. My bad, guys. But the question never really left my mind, and I kept chipping away at this script until I had my answer. And so here I am, dear viewer, to answer the question of... To start, we have to define what a turn-based game even is. Honestly, it feels like now more than ever, game genres are purely based on vibes. Like, look at NBA 2K. Most people will call this a sports game. What does that even mean? This is low-key just an RPG. Experience, levels, skills, quests. Wait, should I make a video about 2K being an RPG? Never mind, that's irrelevant. My point is, the line between game genres is blurred at this point, so I really gotta narrow down the definition of a turn-based RPG. But for that, we gotta go back to a time before Pokemon was even a concept. The origin of turn-based combat. Turn-based RPGs started back in the 70s, with a lesser-known, very niche tabletop game you may have heard of called Dungeons & Dragons. If you're wondering why so many D&D monsters look prehistoric, it's because dinosaurs were still around back then. D&D, along with plenty of other old tabletop games, were most likely the main inspiration behind turn-based combat as we know it today. And that brings us to The Dungeon. No, not a dungeon, The Dungeon. The Dungeon was a game made by Don Daglow and released in 1975 for the PDP-10? Quick side note here. I went down like a rabbit hole on this one. I didn't even know about the existence of this device before doing research on this video. The PDP-10 was an old mainframe computer that could run early video games just like Dungeon. It was used from the late 60s all the way up to the mid 80s. Well, speaking of the 80s, this is when more and more of those turn-based games started popping up. Stuff like the Ultimate Trilogy and Wizardry. More stuff I'd never even heard of before writing this script. All this is to get to the point where turn-based RPGs really broke into stride with the release of Dragon Quest for the original Famicom and NES systems. Dragon Quest was pretty much the first turn-based RPG to be developed specifically for a console, and it defined the JRPG genre as a whole moving forward. It won Famitsu's Game of the Year in 1986, and again with its sequels in 87 and 88, becoming the face of turn-based games. Okay, history lesson done. Now that we know where turn-based games come from, we can move on to... Well, Wikipedia describes turn-based RPGs as games that emphasize turn-based combat where the player takes control of the characters one at a time, selecting which action for them to take through a menu-based system. This allows the player to think about every move and the action they make in-game ahead of time and make more strategic plays. And to be honest, I think that hits the nail on the head pretty well. In my opinion, there are two major components in a turn-based system. 1. Turns. Duh. Even if we look at the original turn-based games, we can see how well this is established. In Dungeons & Dragons, players got a roll for initiative when combat starts. The results of everyone's roll gives you the turn order for the rest of the combat encounter. Wait, that word right there, turn order. For me, this is the basis of turn-based combat. Whether you can actively see it or not, there is that turn order and it can be altered, but in most cases, you can react to that change. But I'll get back to that. The bottom line is, you and your opponent, which is the game itself in most cases, take turns selecting moves. This brings me to my second major component of a turn-based system, reacting. I'm not sure how to put that into one word, so let me just explain. Let's use one of my favorite JRPGs, Dragon Quest XI, as an example. As you can see here, I'm obviously taking turns with the opponent. It takes an action, I can choose my reaction based on what I just saw, and then the opponent will do the same for my action and so on. Did you catch that? Depending. In any turn-based game, the idea of a turn order will allow you to see the move your opponent makes, then adjust your game plan accordingly. If the boss hits me for 20 HP, I can decide between using a healing spell or trying to get some more damage in. That reactionary step happens every single turn in between actions. I can always make a decision based on the knowledge of what my opponent just did. This is why you wouldn't call a game like Persona 5 or Dragon Quest a real-time strategy game. There is no simultaneous action. Even in a tactical or strategy RPG like Final Fantasy Tactics, you take turns with the enemy forces. You can react to each move that's previously made when it's your turn. Now, if you're wondering why I just rambled on about reactions for however long that was, I promise it'll make sense soon. I'm gonna explain. Alright, so I've explained what a turn-based game actually is. Now I'll do my best to get this all pulled together without sounding like a complete madman. The reason Pokemon isn't fully turn-based in comparison to the rest of the genre is because of one simple reason: the synchronicity. In the average Pokemon battle, you have your turn number of course, and your Pokemon can take turns in combat based on their speed. But we're missing something here. Is it possible to react to your opponent's previous move and act accordingly before they move again? Exactly, there isn't. But Danchi, I hear you say, you can find out what moves your opponent has and act accordingly. And to that I say, nuh-uh. I'm gonna use competitive Pokemon here to make my point, specifically VGC. Just like in a JRPG, there are two opposing parties on the screen, and in modern VGC, you can see your opponent's team sheet, which is a list of the moves, items, and abilities your opponent's Pokemon have. So you know what the opponent will do, right? Wrong. At no point during any normal battle do you have 100% certainty on how to react to your opponent's moves. You can guess, of course, which is kind of part of the game, but nothing is guaranteed. Unlike most other turn-based RPGs, the opposing sides pick their moves simultaneously. Once you pick your move, you can't be sure what will happen during the turn because the game itself reads your moves and simulates the turn independently. In a Pokemon battle, you need to both pick your moves and guess what moves your opponent will make at the same time. This is the whole thesis for my video, how Pokemon battles differ from the rest of the genre. Now, the question is, if Pokemon isn't really a turn-based RPG, what even is it? Now, I won't tell you that Pokemon is completely divorced from the turn-based genre, but it differs from everything else enough for me to make a case, I think. I personally think Pokemon shares some key factors in common with auto battlers and auto chess games. What are auto battlers, you might ask? They're a subgenre of strategy games where two players have a battlefield of units. If you've heard of Teamfight Tactics or Dota Auto Chess, you've heard of an auto battler. They're battle simulators. During a round, you can select your initial units and their placements, maybe pick actions or reposition them, and then the game itself will simulate a round based on unit stats and actions chosen, without player input until the next round. Wait, I just described a Pokemon turn, right? At the beginning of the game, you have your initial Pokemon positions. Okay, cool. Then at the beginning of a turn, you can pick a move or switch out your Pokemon. Check. Then once both players have locked in their options, the game just lets the actions play out, without player input. That's right, Pokemon is actually a strategy game. Okay, well not completely, but I hope you get what I'm trying to say. Imagine you're playing chess, but both you and your opponents got to make moves at the same time. And there's a catch. Every turn, neither you or your opponent can see the other person's side of the board until you both made a move. Pokemon, despite being touted as the face of turn-based games in the modern eye, aren't really representative of the turn-based RPG genre as a whole. In fact, the Pokemon game that's most similar to the rest of turn-based games is a game that deviates from the Pokemon formula. Pokemon Legends Arceus, aka the best Pokemon game on Switch, changed up the battle formula for Pokemon. In PLA's combat, you actually have a turn order displayed on the side of the screen, and it can be changed based on you using strong style and agile style. People love to use Pokemon as proof that the general public does like turn-based RPGs, but I personally don't think Pokemon represents that genre. The series is pretty different. Pokemon basically pioneered this monster catching genre, and the games have been kind of their own thing since the start. Despite similarities to JRPGs as a whole, the Pokemon franchise is kind of separate. Wait, are Pokemon games even JRPGs at all? Well, they're RPGs that come from Japan, right? Japanese RPG? Right? But that's not really what makes a JRPG. Oh no, hold on. Okay, it's got menu-based combat, a linear story, party management, side quests, random encounters, at least until Gen 9, level ups, and like a class job system with the types. Okay, well, Pokemon definitely checks all their JRPG boxes. So why doesn't it feel like one? Alright, I kinda baited you. The answer here is yes. But like I said at the beginning, game genres are just kinda based on vibes now. Unlike the last section, I won't get up here and act like there's truly a case to be made for Pokemon not being a JRPG. But just like I said before, the Pokemon series isn't exactly representative of turn-based games or JRPGs as a genre. When discussing Pokemon, a lot of people tend to compare it to other JRPGs when criticizing or praising it, especially when it comes to discussing mechanics like the EXP sharing and random encounters, which are core to the identity of JRPGs. Pokemon does have a lot of JRPG DNA, but it's been unique even since the early days. Pokemon was always its own thing, despite being heavily influenced by the JRPGs that came before it. And then there's change in mechanics over time. Things like difficulty, random encounters, more linear exploration, and all these things made Pokemon feel much more like a JRPG, but they've kind of been eroded over the years. Is that what makes it feel like less of a JRPG? Or maybe Pokemon's focus on multiplayer experiences set it apart from the very beginning, like I said earlier. When you really take a look at the battle mechanics of Pokemon, you can see that there's a lot more depth to it than meets the eye. The problem is, a lot of that stuff isn't fully utilized in a single player campaign. It's like the battle system in Pokemon is built for PvP. It's almost as if one of the series' original selling points was trading and battling with your friends. Oh. That's a big reason right there, the target audience. I brought up EXP and random encounters earlier for a reason, as those are a couple of the biggest pain points among modern fans of the series. But that's the thing, those systems, that friction, are the essence of a JRPG's gameplay loop. Pokemon can't be the face of JRPGs because Pokemon fans don't even really like JRPGs. Take a look at this tweet right here. The concept of Pokemon being an exception to haters of JRPGs and other turn-based games isn't an uncommon occurrence. I have a friend who will scoff at anything vaguely called a JRPG, but he's been playing Pokemon games since he was 7 years old. The average Pokemon fan doesn't really like JRPGs or turn-based games. They like Pokemon. Legends Arceus feels like much more of a JRPG to me, but it's an experimental departure from the rest of the mainline games, and it's often treated like a spin-off because of that. It's not, by the way. And so, I've talked about why Pokemon doesn't feel like the rest of the JRPG genre, and now the question is, does it really have to? Pokemon being different yet similar to the rest of the genre is what really makes it special, but that similarity should still be there, in my opinion. We gotta keep that in mind when we discuss the games, things we want to see, and the things we'd like to leave behind. Comparing Pokemon to modern JRPGs as a whole is sometimes helpful, but at the same time, Pokemon is an ever-changing franchise, and sometimes the comparisons that we make to other JRPGs hinder the discussion more than helping. Pokemon is too different to represent turn-based JRPGs, despite the popular opinion that it's lagging behind its contemporaries. The conversation around the series needs to consider what's good for Pokemon, not what's good for JRPGs as a whole. Does it need to catch up in some ways? Yeah, but think of it like a staircase. Just because you don't see your friend beside you on the way up, it doesn't mean that they're 2 floors behind. Maybe they're just in a different stairwell. Anyways y'all, this video was really just a thought at first and it kinda ended up being whatever all that was. Do you even know what I was trying to say the whole time?
I don't know.
At the end of the day, I love Pokemon and how different it is. This was just something I'd been thinking about in the months since I had this video idea. Holy smokes, it took so long to get this together that they announced the next generation of Pokemon. Like I said before, this video was meant to be out a long time ago, but school started, yada yada. I also might have been distracted by some other games. Screw that Mega Planetus guy, by the way. I hate him. Anyways, you should all check out my friend Dupes' video about the EXP share in Pokemon. He talks about a couple of the things that I mentioned in this video. That's all I have for now. I'd love to see a discussion about what you all thought down in the replies below, whether you agree with my perspective or think I might be a little bit crazy, but keep it respectful. If you enjoyed the video at all, why not drop a sub? It's free, yada yada, and like the video too. I'm still doing my best to try and get these videos out in a timely manner, and I really want to do once a month, but we'll see what happens. This script took forever to write because I kept deleting and rewriting sections, but I think I finally put something together that I actually like. With all that said, please check out some more videos on my channel if you're interested, and have yourselves a damn good one.